Uh, Good morning from Texas, Russia, and everybody else who's watching this. My name is Andy Higgins. I work for an independent consultancy, and I'm here to talk about Domino application platform versus the Microsoft app platform specifically. So first and foremost, I must say I am not a developer. I used to be in my dim and distant past, but I'm more in the admin section right now. And I do write scripts all the time, Python, PowerShell particularly. I'm a collaboration architect, and so I understand and I've designed lots of collaborative applications for company requirements. So let's look at a bit of a background, a bit more of my background here. I've always been interested in coexistence and integration of systems. When at Lotus in the late 90s, I worked with integration coexistence notes with other email platforms, not just on the routing, but with the content. I worked Lotus migration coexistence when I worked for Bank of America, because they made the switch from Lotus, unfortunately, to Microsoft at that time. Also, since then, I've worked with several clients moving to Office 365 Mail. But one of the key things when people move to Office 365, they end up moving email, but don't, and instant messaging, but they still have residual Domino applications. So there are a lot of companies out there that still have Domino applications, and they may be wondering, should we use the Microsoft stuff? And I'm here to tell you, well, I'm here to help you make an informed decision and help your clients make informed decisions based on facts and the costs. So let's move on. Yes, and I'm talking about myself again. I worked for the IBM competitive SWOT team for 5 years, where we did a lot of comparisons between the Microsoft stack and the IBM, now HCL stack. So I do know a lot about Microsoft as well as Domino, having worked with Domino for more than 20 years. So what's this presentation about? So I'm assuming everybody knows Domino at least enough to get by on this call. You also know the elephant in the room, and there's my little attempt at using a little bit of Russian. I believe it translates directly into elephant in the room. I don't know if it means the same thing, but as you might imagine, an elephant in the room is a very obvious thing, and that's what Microsoft is. It's there. We can't ignore it. Okay, we have to take account for it, and doing that with your clients and showing them that you understand it, but still you're on their side, I believe allows you to promote Domino inside a company. Anyway, many companies are moving, have moved their email to Office 365, as I said. What about applications that were built on Domino? A lot of times SharePoint has been suggested as a solution, but if you've looked at SharePoint, it's not apples to apples, as we say. It does some things, but it doesn't do everything that Domino can do. I've been working with Office 365 for quite some time. I actually support clients on Office 365 as well as clients on Domino. And I'd like to arm you with the knowledge of the Power Platform, which is predominantly PowerApps, but there are other pieces on the Microsoft side. So hopefully you'll understand more about it by the end of this presentation. So something I've noticed with the Office 365 platform is over time, they've been bringing out additional applications to cover certain functionality in business. Obviously, the applications that everybody knows in Office are Word and Excel and PowerPoint, those three big ones that everybody uses, and Outlook, of course. But these applications predominantly are web-based applications, but they are independent applications that are set up by Microsoft, so you don't have to do your own application development. So it's simple, zero coding, one would hope, application development. Forms is a new one that really came out recently. It's sort of, it's a competitor to SurveyMonkey, if you use SurveyMonkey. That's what Forms is about. But it does allow you to input stuff in your enterprise and save it to a backend in SharePoint or push it through workflow somewhere else. We'll get to the workflow part a little later in this talk. Bookings, that directly competes against some of those products out there that expose your calendar to people to allow you to come in and make bookings with your calendar. Whiteboard is an interesting one because Whiteboard tends to be built into applications, but in Microsoft's case, they have a separate application called Whiteboard, and then they pull this in to different places. So the Whiteboard on Teams, for example, can be pulled in, and it is an independent application, so to speak. Planner, that's a simple base project management tool. Lists is a brand new one. I haven't had a chance really to look at that, but it sounds like a bit like SharePoint, SharePoint Miner or whatever, because SharePoint is basically a list-based database solution to store data and actions on those lists and views of those lists. Lists, as I say, I've not looked at it yet, so watch out for my next presentation next year, and I'll have more on that. Of course, I can't really ignore SharePoint. Well, yes, I can. It's an application that comes, but it's a huge part of Office 365. And then there are the following, what is known as the Microsoft Power Platform, somewhat grandiose title. PowerApps, that are basically for defining apps, to display them, to pull data in, and to define just applications from the ground up. A bit like what we do with Domino. Power Automate is a very distinct, separate part. Power Automate gets thrown in for free with certain connectors in your Office 365 license, but what it's responsible for is the workflow. So I think Microsoft want people to know that there's a difference between moving data around from one place to another through the use of just triggers, and the actual application, which runs data and performs application work. Then we have Power BI, which is business intelligence, which is basically their next version of Excel presentations. It's to present data to the bosses, so it looks nice. Excuse me a second. And then they have this AI builder, which is using artificial intelligence within the Power Platform. I think it's amusing that I've seen references to Power AI on the Microsoft side, but when you Google Power AI, IBM's solution comes up. So IBM have that trade name, I think, and Microsoft can't use Power AI, so they use the word AI Builder. And then Power Virtual Agents. They're basically chatbots. They just introduced those in the last year. That allows you to build a chatbot solution, whenever you log onto websites and you have these friendly people talking with you, and they're not really people. They're just chatbots using AI on the back end and data. So all of that is included in the Power Platform. And here is a nice graphic showing the Power Platform. Now, an interesting point about this is they all use data connectors to connect to other systems. And you will be amazed if you go onto any of these services and see what sort of connectors they have. It's basically API for dummies. It allows you to go in, grab data from other things, and pull it in. Now, one thing I will mention about data connectors, there are sort of two levels of data connectors. One are the ones that come free with whatever one of these Power Platform items that you use, but some of them where you connect to perhaps SAP. I'm just guessing there. I'm not exactly, I don't have the list of which ones are the higher level. You have to pay for them. So you have to pay for the additional ability to connect to certain other systems. But that's a whole story in its own, because there are so many of these connectors. I don't have a list of which ones you can use for free and which ones not. But the basic ones, like accessing anything in Outlook or anything in Microsoft Suite, you can use free connectors. I've often thought it'd be nice to have a connector to connect to a Domino server. I think that's possible. I've not really had the time to look further into it because they allow JSON, standard JSON connectors, for example, for grabbing JSON data. So I think that's something that may be built on in the future. I don't see anything out there, people publishing anything about it. AI Builder I mentioned, but the one thing on the right there, bottom right, called Dataverse. You may have heard of the Common Data Store, if you've ever looked at Microsoft apps, the Power Platform before. The Common Data Store was basically all the data in the Office 365 tenant, essentially, and more, of course. Anything you can get your hands on. They've renamed it, and now they call it Dataverse. Let's see. Yeah, I actually mentioned it a little later. So, PowerApps in a day. If anybody is interested in learning more than what I'm telling you about today, you can do what I did, and I've done this twice actually because I found it quite fascinating. You can sign up for App in a Day. There is another thing that they just started pushing, Power Automate, which is Flow, which is their workflow in a day. And you can sign up for it, or you can just use either of these links in here. The middle link, the App in a Day, aka.ms link, is linked to the lab documents. So you can do the lab yourself. The documentation is very good, although it's in English. I don't think they have Russian yet. Down the bottom, the Power Automate Day, the material is there as well. I've not been to the Power Automate in a Day yet, but I've looked through the material. And, you know, you can go through most of this in about 4 or 5 hours, maybe. And you end up building applications and workflows within the Microsoft subsystem. And whether or not you're going to do that, it really helps to understand what it's all about. It just takes a few hours. So that's part of my experience in being able to present to you and compare what I've seen with what I know about Domino. And I've actually written some applications. It's zero code stuff, low code. I'm not a developer. Okay, so speaking a little bit about that, what was Domino when it first came out? Well, it was aimed at reaching out to citizen developers with low code techniques. That was the idea, I think, or one of the ideas with Domino, that you could do more with more people moving data around than having to have the IT staff develop software. And so it made it a lot easier. And where we saw where Domino still exists today, it was where companies had adopted Domino properly. You can see a lot of companies just adopted Domino for email. And so when they replaced it, you know, they didn't miss it because they weren't using it properly. What the Microsoft Power Platform is aiming to do is hit the sweet spot on the citizen developer side. That's what I believe. So a few acronyms, or just words that you'll see around in the Office 365 world or Microsoft world. A tenant refers to the Office 365 environment, the whole thing. So that's what's known as a tenant. A CDS, as I mentioned before, is Common Data Store, which has now been renamed as Dataverse. CDM, I didn't see that they'd renamed that, but that is the model, which you go out to GitHub and search out there. There's a lot of documentation on how the model is defined, which reflects what the Dataverse is. Excuse me. And then Power Automate, which used to be called Flow, but they want everything to begin with the word power. That's the workflow component. PowerApps, that's a GUI to build applications, of course. And Power BI. Now, one of the interesting things about Power BI, just unlike all the others, you can actually get a local client for that. So there is a hard client, which I prefer. That's why I like Lotus Admin and Designer and things. It's not all web. Everything else is web. So Power BI is a local client, and you can, it's up to your personal preferences. But the web applications drive me crazy. So a few short slides here. I put this in about the Dataverse and the definition of the Dataverse. It adds data storage and modeling capabilities to PowerApps that's scalable and easy to provision. So what does that mean? Well, exactly. Hang on, sorry, my presentation is getting out of hand. Okay, so what you have in PowerApps is you have tables, which used to be called entities. They just changed the name of that too, which are document sets. Okay, they can be connected together with relationships with other tables, relationships within different columns in the tables, but they contain multiple rows, and each row has data columns. Okay, so for example, a project table, which defines projects, may have columns named like due date and status, and it may be related to a project owner table, which might have columns such as name and email. The Dataverse piece abstracts a lot of the database management, so you don't have to do that. It provides an interface, so somebody who doesn't really know much about programming and technology, they can access this data with ease. There are standard tables. This is a list of some of the tables, and oh, geez, sorry, it keeps on jumping. These are tables that I pulled out of my tenant, just examples. In each table, when I click on a table, it takes me in and shows me the columns in the table, which are essentially the fields. That they used to be called fields, now they're called columns. They changed this about a month ago, by the way. So I'm going to show you an example of a table in a minute with the columns, and the columns have things like username and address, etc., etc. Let's show you that. So here are the columns in the table user. So they're all pertinent attributes that a user will have. And as you can see up at the top left there, you can see columns, relationships, business rules, views, forms, dashboards, blah, 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 defined within a table. So every table has all these things defined within it. And I'll go over a few of these things. Business rules, it's interesting, similar to Domino, you can write a rule based on what's in certain columns to fill other columns. And that's what, so it relates to computed fields in Domino, I believe. But it has a nice little interface right in there. So if you click, remember when I go back here and see that business rules in the screenshot here, when you click on that business rules, it actually brings this up and allows you to create a business rule yourself. Then we have views, which are just like Domino. It allows you to define how a list of records are shown in the application. You can create custom views. There are standard views that come with every application. Obviously, this is the same as similar to Domino, because you create views to make the application users more productive by seeing the data they choose to see by choosing a view. So here's an example of the views, disabled users, enabled users. That's straight from the user table. My direct reports, all this. You can build all these different types of views. Then forms, like another well-known product. Forms is how you get the data in. You can create the form, you can design it, and let me show you what it looks like. It looks like this. So this is a user form for a new user. So, as I say, I'm not going to deep dive in any of this stuff. You can quite easily get a test tenant and take a look at this yourself and dive in. However, I would recommend using that the course that Microsoft themselves offer for free if you want to learn this, because that to me was the easiest way to understand your way around all of this, because there's a lot of information. Just like with Domino, I would not believe that I could become a Domino programmer overnight. You're not going to become a Microsoft programmer overnight, no, or zero code programmer. Data is interesting because it's similar to in the NSF, you see the data. If you have a template, you don't see the data because you don't put data in templates. But in Microsoft, they show the data in one of the drop-down menus at the top, so you can see the data that you're referring to within your tables that you've defined. So, putting it together in a long sentence, with Domino, and this is going to test the translators, I think. With Domino, we have an NSF, which is a NoSQL database, which contains documents organized by a pseudo schema contained in a template, if we're lucky. And we add data to the NSF through forms and display it through views. We define workflows, move data around the app, and we can define relationships between the data. So in the Office 365 Power Platform, we have tables that define the data objects in a NoSQL way. We can create other tables, essentially defining new data structures. We can load data onto the tables through forms, display it through views. We can define workflows and move data around the app, and we can define relationships between the data. So I have a feeling some people from Domino moved over to Microsoft because there are some remarkable similarities and even naming concepts between Domino and PowerApps. However, having said that, I've thought about that in the past. There are a lot of app platforms, and a lot of app platforms are built very similar to this. But I'm here to explain, show to you the similarities between the Power Platform and Domino. So also in PowerApps, there are two types of applications that you can create, a Canvas app and a model-driven app. Essentially, Canvas apps are like starting from new. Model-driven use data that already exists, specifically from the Dynamic 365 product that comes with Office 365. So it's almost like the canvas is like an artist starting with a blank canvas and you make your own app. The model app is based on data that you might already have. Interesting enough, the way they work is the PowerApps mobile app only works with Canvas apps, and the Dynamics mobile app works with the model-driven app. So what does all this mean in the competitive landscape? Well, Domino and the Microsoft Power Platform, I think, are quite similar in functionality. However, there's two major differences. Of course, Domino is on-premise and Power Platform is on the cloud. I mean, even if you use a cloud-based Domino service, you've still got hard servers. It's not like a great big cloud of stuff like the way Power Platform is. In effect, this differentiates them big time, in my opinion. I'm quoting a couple of examples here, real-world examples, when using one or the other. I have a number of small customers with large data sets, and they need to analyze them locally. If we take those data sets and push them into the cloud, not only does it take forever, I'm talking about one legal firm that I have, they received 8 terabytes of discovery data. And that's a lot of data. And what are we going to do? We get it in, and we get it on a disk, or we get an FTP server, and we've got to move it to the cloud. We've got to pay for 8 terabytes per month of data. Then we have to write programs in the cloud that we have to pay for to act on that data. And then after 3-6 months, we get rid of it all and go to the next case. I personally like the idea of having local data storage, which I can pay $500 for, put all the data on that, and run an application locally using Domino. I mean, why would I want to move it all to the cloud and pay a fortune in the cloud? Well, why would you want to do that? You get backup, of course, with the data, but small customers don't really care about that. I think there are situations for sure where the cloud doesn't fit. And that's where I think Domino can come in for sure. Also, I'm a migration engineer. I do a lot of migrations. Something you learn, and I think this applies to it applies not just to migrations, but it's very key with migrations from the perspective of app and data should be as co-located as possible. The closer it is together, the faster it'll run. I mean, I'm not saying anything earth-shattering here. In migrations, for example, often when we move data from one place to another, you have migration engines, and they may be close to the source data or the destination data, but they're never close to both. And that always leads to issues in the migration. And it's an issue that you have to work with, because it's a timing issue on how long that data can get processed and move. So I would say if your data's in the cloud, then apps in the cloud, that's a good idea. But if your data's locally and you don't want to pay for it in the cloud, or it's local and you don't want to load it in the cloud, then it makes sense to have on-premise applications. And yeah, Microsoft don't do that, right? Domino's on-premise. Cloud's not always good. That's what I just said. The Notes Designer client is an on-premise hard client. If you're old school like me, I don't like using web clients. I wrote something else that I changed it to just say pain there, but they really are. They can be a pain in the behind, as we say. And then, of course, you've got to understand where Microsoft's revenue. Microsoft are driving the cloud like crazy. Their salespeople don't get any money for selling Exchange servers on premise or anything. They get all their money, all their big bonuses, by shifting workflow and data to the cloud. Why? Because of recurring revenue, and that's the future of all of this. So, yes, I wanted to say a little bit more about PowerApps. The licensing used to be difficult, just like IBM. Licensing used to be difficult, but thanks to Uwe and Tony Holder and their team behind them, it seems like licensing of Domino is a lot easier. And now maybe Microsoft took a leaf out of their book, because Microsoft's licensing is actually a lot simpler now. Those are the costs. Bear in mind what I said before. These are the basic license costs, the standard license costs for most situations, but it's only really for accessing data on the Office 365 platform, and a few other things, like you can get data with Facebook with free connectors and LinkedIn, but there are some connectors that cost extra that you have to pay for. I always want to remind you about that. Power App pricing, it's $10 per user per month if you just want to run. It says single apps here, but it actually allows you 2 apps and an intranet, whatever that means. Unlimited apps. To be able to run them, you need to pay for each user $40 a month. And for our Russian comrades, I printed out the Russian there. So I'm assuming PYD means rubles. Excuse me a second. So it's pretty costly. I didn't do a comparison in rubles for the comparison between HCL, Domino, and PowerApp licensing, but if you took a company with 500 employees and 10 applications and looked at the application licensing cost with HCL, you would use the CCB or CCX licenses, and it's you don't have an app limit, and you pay $7 a month per user, which is $3,500 a month. If you took PowerApps licensing, and they have more than 2 apps, so I'm just putting that in there. If it was 2 apps, it'd be $5,000 a month, which is still more than HCL Domino. But if it's more than 2 apps, then it's $20,000 a month. That's a lot of money. Everybody who access the applications that drive your business. So this simple slide here to me says a lot about how Domino, especially if Domino is still in the business and these companies are looking to move to use Microsoft applications, you want to show them this and slap them around a bit. It's not worth it. Let's see, I'm on 31 minutes. I've got a few more minutes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about migrations from Domino. This was from another presentation I used to do in the past about management making decision to move to Office 365. And so we wouldn't discuss that. Management make these decisions. They make good, bad decisions, whatever. We want to look what we want to do. Well, you can do email and instant messaging coexistence or whatever. In fact, if you want to listen to this, you can join the presentation done tomorrow by myself and Heather Hottenstein together, where we talk more about coexistence between Microsoft and Office 365. But one of the big things is application coexistence and migration. And a lot of people think that when they move all their email over to Microsoft and instant messaging over to Microsoft, everything else moves over. But there's a whole bunch of stuff left on Domino, and it takes money to move. I don't think this is an unreasonable cost explanation, but to move one app can take 3 to 6 months. So if you cost that out with project manager and developer costs, you could be paying $100,000 per app. And then if you had 100 apps, it's $10 million. And that's just to move it from Domino to Microsoft. Then you've got to start paying $40,000. Actually, that was, if I say 10 apps here, I should have said 10 apps. It's still $1 million bucks. $1 million to move 10 apps. And then you've got to be paying $40,000 a month for everybody to access them. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Keep the Domino servers and take advantage of the CCB and CCX Domino server licensing, and use SAML to allow interoperability, coexistence. SAML works just fine for the most part. Again, I mentioned that in my call tomorrow, or my presentation tomorrow. There's a couple of things you've got to be aware of when using SAML, but in general, you can use SAML to give access to Office 365 users on Domino. So that is all I have to say. That's all my stuff if you want to contact me. I thank you for listening, and hope it wasn't too boring. And if you've got any questions, now would be the time to ask them.
Энди, большое спасибо вам за вашу презентацию.
No, indeed, thanks a lot for your presentation.
Welcome.
Вы очень подробно рассказали про то, какие деньги позволяет экономить Domino.
You told us so many details about how much money Domino allows you to save.
Right.
Yes.
Totally, it's obvious to me. It was even obvious before people started moving to Office 365 for mail that Domino was actually cheaper for mail, for email.
Это для меня абсолютно очевидно, даже если взять вот тот пример, когда люди стали переходить на Office 365 в отношении просто имейлов. Здесь было просто очевидно то, что это было гораздо дешевле использовать Domino, чем Office.
Да, так что спасибо вам еще раз за эту чудесную лекцию, и увидимся с вами обязательно завтра.
So thanks a lot for this wonderful lecture, and we will see you for sure tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye for now.
Спасибо большое, до свидания.